I like to end the first function with a bunch of examples, like when we do first and second functions. So I tend to collect things that I think purely kind of show us, oh, this is the first and second function. So here's some things. Let's actually start with this. If you can get a clear, you're not going to be able to see this really well. But this is a company that makes these elements in lucite, and they made this, and it was just I had to buy it because it was like they're precious elements, you know. So this is gold and silver, and then we have things like we have diamond and ruby and emerald and sapphire. So these you can kind of see the colors of it. It's hard to see really close. My camera's not picking it up. But these are just little minute fragments of things that we consider precious. Precious metals, precious gems, you know. So those are things. If you like gold, you know, then you tend to like it in the first function. Yeah, that it becomes an element. And some people like silver more, you know, or sometimes people will like a white gold, you know, as opposed to a rose gold. So there's choices, and again, those are choices in the first function. Yeah. I love to show this picture because these are two engagement rings. And what's cute about it, sometimes when I show it, someone in the class will say, "Oh, then the first one's beautiful, but the second one, oh hell no," you know. So what you're seeing, the first one is just a kind of classic, iconic um, uh, engagement ring, whereas the second one, that's the Starship Enterprise, and there are people that will adore that as an object, but you have to be in love with the metaphor and of, you know, and the story, the whole second function part of the story of Starship Enterprise. Now, I like to say jewelry is a good example of things that we tend to like first function. There's a lot of jewelry that is very first functional, and there's a real purpose for it, because sometimes earrings, we just want the gem. We just want people to see the gem in and of itself. And we can ask, well, why don't we want a story up here? And I often think it's because what could be more precious than two beautiful two beautiful diamonds on two beautiful ears, you know? And that if someone gave you diamond earrings, that's what they're kind of saying, is that this is an adornment. It's precious the way you are precious. Yeah. And oftentimes we like jewelry as adornment in that way. Now, there's times when jewelry becomes second function, and for specific purposes, and it becomes symbolic for us. I often think people that like to wear a crucifix or a Star of David, that there are times where there are religious symbols that we have for those elements. Sometimes when Madonna first came out, she wore some of those symbols, but she wore them as kind of iconoclastic, and some people had great trouble with that as she did it. And then there are other jewelry things too. So look at the world of jewelry, because it's fascinating, and it's fascinating how much of it is first functional and when does it become second functional. At the end of this, I'll show you another example of that. Here are a couple cups in my collection. I kind of really like making lattes and having a cappuccino in these. But these are by two friends of mine. George Bose did the first one here, and the other is by Daniel Postotnik. And they're both ceramic artists, and you can see that George deals with much more the first function. His things often just have these colors and these shapes, and they're really beautiful. They're bumpy, so they're really quite fun to touch. And Dan uses it like a canvas, where he will paint various things with these figures. So again, first function, second function. Yeah, not an either or, but both kind of beautiful and both challenging us to look at the world differently. Yeah. This is a hummingbird, and I would say that this hummingbird is quite beautiful in the first function. Yeah. So in the first function, you could say it's a rainbow. In the second function, you could say it's a hummingbird. Yeah. These birds here, this first picture I quite like because it's quite chaotic. So in the first function, it's chaotic. And the second picture here, it's so ordered. And this was probably visually manipulated. I can't imagine that, but maybe, I mean, maybe in the world, the birds flew like this. But anyway, it's quite different how we perceive these two forms. This is interesting because Rachel White Reed here made this for the Olympics. It was a poster for the London Olympics of 2012. And what I thought was really interesting is we're so used to the trademark symbol of the Olympics, which is here on the right. But on the left, she decided, let's do something that's more fun, that has a lot more energy, that also actually kind of, for me, reminds me of all the people collecting for the Olympic Games. Yeah, so it's a different kind of symbolism and a different kind of thing she's after, but in the first function. Two pictures. I took, this picture is two dancers in a space. I think this is a dance studio in London. And here on the other side, we've got Ali Yufan. You know, and again, sometimes you're seeing squares. The squares are what's interesting in this. So in the first function, these works have that element of squareness. These are, perhaps you'll find these kind of fun. Some modernist friends of mine really liked this project I did, where I had dancers submit to me different images of dancers, and then I took them and I made them more first functional and more abstract, where, you know, I just said, well, what would this be as if it were an abstract drawing? Same here. And what this is fun to do is to challenge yourself. When I see this form, can I not just see two dancers and fabric and desert, but can I see the form? What is that shape? Can I just appreciate the organicness of that form of the fabric and the dancers and that they take? Yeah, same thing here. Yeah, this is quite a fun one. And we looked at this picture already with our sunset, you know, looking at the sunset in the first function and looking at the sunset in the second. And again, the challenge is to be able to look, and even when you see out the window this amazing sunset, to be able to see the colors in their first function, yeah, and the forms. This is Ruth St. Denis. This is a dance where she became the peacock, yeah. So here she is with the dress, and she's crawling on the ground outside in nature, where she was being the peacock. And we could say that this is a kind of metaphorical character dance. So it's perhaps there's no story to this other than just the movement and showing us this character and this thing. So right in the middle of our sliding scale. Here's some pictures that were submitted, and they're quite fun because, you know, we see the roundness of those two moon shapes, and we could have a dancer where we called this full moon, you know, could be just a beautiful dance with this amazing big dress, you know. The lighting designer would probably love to get their hands on that to light it. There's, I might put a clip in this playlist that you could watch a little bit about. In 1983, this was a film, Koyaanisqatsi. It was done by Godfrey Reggio with music by Philip Glass. And I remember going to the movie theaters and seeing it. And it was amazing because there was no words through the whole film. The whole film was just minimalist music and images. So I'm going to put a clip from it to watch, because this also, like theater, film, often when we go to the movies, we see a story. So this was fascinating because it was a full-length film. He did Koyaanisqatsi, then he did two other films that went in the series also, and they were all the same. They were really largely first functional works. Koyaanisqatsi is a word that means life out of balance. And this was in the 80s, people thinking that we were perhaps, I think in that era, we started to think about the environment, and maybe we were harmful to the earth, and maybe these cities we were building and that we were polluting and we were doing these things we were taking life out of balance. That's probably the beginning of some of those ideas that are now much more prevalent that we're still grappling with today. Yeah. And then finally here, let's look at a couple images. These are some scenic designs that these were by Devin Pierce, who was a scenic designer in the theater department. The play was The Seagull. The director was my husband, Michael Lugering. Now, Michael pushed the scenic design here much more towards first function. So he says, the Seagull is set, it's at a summer home, it's on a lake, and he said, I don't want to just that we just like look at this backdrop, of trees. Can we have this idea of trees, this pixelated idea with these squares? Now, the squares, if we looked close, those are actually floor tiles that you can get in colors. Those 1-foot tiles that are like, look in the lobby of HFA 111, and you'll see that kind of Armstrong flooring tile. Comes in multiple colors. So they got them in various colors, and they can hung them in the air. What I liked about this was the pixelated nature of these squares, all separate from each other, but collectively it looked like light coming through leaves and through the trees. What it also can become is a great metaphor, because in the play, all of these characters were trying to somehow connect to one another or connect to these dreams and desires that they have, but they were having trouble doing that. Yeah. And so I thought that the scenic design was a perfect metaphor. The other thing that you can pay attention to is that there isn't a solid surface that isn't slanted. That here you're seeing those two slants, and then even the whole floor was raked this way, meaning that if you went upstage, you were going up. If you went downstage, you were coming down. So the whole thing was not on stable ground. None of the characters and the play itself wasn't. So that you can see as part of the design becomes part of telling us the story of these characters and what they want. In the first function, we were seeing those desires. And for me, that's smart and fascinating, and really also captivating as a concept for a work of theater. Yeah. The moon was beautiful because they made this moon out of square tiles. That was quite nice and lovely in the piece. And then one more piece here. I'll show you some of this. Is Sam Shepard's Fool for Love. And this was another kind of beautiful set. Tom Brombowski, I think was his name, was the scenic designer. Again, Michael Lugering is the director of the show. And in this show, we have these characters that you see here. There's only 4 people in the entire play. You have this cowboy and this woman and this cowboy, the two standing here in this picture. And they have obviously had a love affair that has gone on for a long amount of time, and they desperately want out of the relationship, but they cannot find a way to end it. Even here, they are in a motel room, and this other man who is seated is her gentleman caller, so he is like the new boyfriend who is coming, who is having to encounter this rodeo cowboy and their relationship with one another. Then there is this old man that talks during the entire piece. And in the play, you're not quite sure if the old man is there or if he's not there. Yeah, so it's fascinating because so to deal with that, Michael Lugering put him on that catwalk above. So in a way, he's in the scene, but he's not really in the physical scene of the place. If we look at a couple other pictures, what's interesting is he's a rodeo cowboy, so you see that the walls are all made out of rope. So in a way, we get the wallpaper is this rope with these knots. And even that tells us the story of them, that they are tied together, that they cannot untie themselves, untether themselves from each other in this piece. So rather than build solid walls, the rope was a really fantastic first functional metaphor for the piece and the world that they were in. I'll give you, you should go watch the story, but here's the spoiler alert, so you can turn this video off if you don't want to know what happens to them in the story. But we end up finding out as we go in the play that the two that are in love are actually brother and sister, that the father had another affair, and they are somehow come together, they fell in love, and now they cannot get out of this. They are both fools for love, that they cannot get out of this love affair. And it's a complicated story and really dramatic. And it does what a play does really well, telling us this second function story. But what's wonderful in these pictures is you see how a director has dealt with it in the first function, in the visual elements of the design of the work. Yeah, so that's quite beautiful to do and to think about.